Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this rainy day. And I hope you all have great Rosh Hashanah celebration with your families here or abroad. Can I ask all of you, most of you are muted, but if not, can I kindly ask you to mute yourself just to not to disturb to our conversation. Thank you. Okay, welcome to our sixth and last lecture of the Beaten Track series for this year. Probably we will prepare for you another series of the Beaten Track. I would like to welcome again Dr. Tuvia Book, leading Israeli tour guide, education, historian, with another amazing travel to Israel. Tuvia, as always, if you have questions, please submit them via chat. And in the end of our conversation, Tuvia will answer them. Thank you, Tuvia. Let's start.
Okay. Hello, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. So nice to see some familiar faces. As you guys know, I am a bit of a wandering Jew. So believe it or not, this time I didn't need to find out the time difference because I'm actually speaking from the hub of the empire, from London itself. I'm just popping by on a quick visit on the way back to the Holy Land. And I'm going to talk about a subject that's very close to my own heart, which is, of course, where I live. As they always say, home is where the heart is. So growing up outside of Israel, it was very unusual difficult really to relate to a lot of things. You know, as I mentioned, I never actually had a name growing up. I was just called the rabbi's son. So I grew up traditionally observant. And basically, I had a upbringing where whenever we heard stories about the Bible stories or Jewish stories, you'd always picture like men in skirts in some long, dusty place a long time ago. And it's difficult to relate to as far as what it was actually like. So just to illustrate a story, I guide a lot of groups in Israel, and thank God Israel finally is opening up for tourists again. So I'll be happy to guide you for real. As exciting, as dynamic as it is to speak to people on the square of a screen, it's a lot better when you're actually there because then you have experiential education. So basically, then you can have all of your senses and taste it and walk it and smell it and touch it and feel it. So I'll be looking forward to seeing many of you in Israel, where you'll be able to replace your virtual experience, or how should we say what Mark Twain used to do, you experience your vicarious experience with a real experience. But again, growing up, these Bible stories for me were just two-dimensional. They were black words on a white page. And I couldn't really relate to what I was reading. I mean, never mind the fact you don't understand it, it's just the stories themselves. So many years later, I was guiding a birthright group. Many of you might know the birthright is a program where the participants are mainly university students who don't have too much of a Jewish background. For some of them, even it's just an accident from birth. And they come to Israel to be connected, because it doesn't matter, even if you go to Jewish school, even if you've seen films or heard amazing presentations on Zionist Federation Zoom sessions or read books, you don't really get it till you're there. You don't understand anything till you're there. It's experiential education, education at its best. So I went and was guiding this group, and we were standing in a place called Emek HaElah. It's about 20 minutes from where I live in Modi'in. And basically, I was saying on this side of the hill were the Philistine army. On the other side of the hill were the Jewish Israelite army of King Saul. And in the middle, this valley is where David fought Goliath. And one of the participants stopped and said, wait, hold on. Are you trying to tell me that that hill and that hill are both mentioned in the Bible? And I said, yes, actually, they are. And then he said, he took a while for him to digest it. And he just said, that's just outrageous. And he just couldn't like fathom that the Bible actually happened. The places where it happened are real. And also the actual events have archaeological evidence to back them up. And that's Israel for you, my friends. When you come there, the Bible enters its third dimension. It becomes alive, it becomes real, it becomes tangible. And that's not just for my Jewish friends, also for my Christian friends as well, to actually walk and see the footsteps of Jesus, to walk on a street in Jerusalem, to know that Jesus walked on that street, to walk around the Sea of Galilee, which of course is not a sea, but a freshwater lake, and to know that he was actually there on those spots is an incredible electric experience. Now you're literally walking on the footsteps of our ancestors. And I am blessed to be living in a town called Modi'in in Israel, which this presentation is about. And Modi'in, if you look on your maps, will know that it's what's called in Hebrew, Makom Tov Be'emsa, which means a good place right in the middle. And we know that when people built locations back in days of yore, not just days of mine, the three things that were important were location, location, location. And Modi'in literally is in the middle of the two north-south routes, the sea route on the coast of Israel and the internal route called the King's Highway. Modi'in connects them both. It's on a plain, beautiful agricultural land, very good water sources in the springs, and it was a lovely place to build. Now, the problem with Israel, again, is location, location, location. Unfortunately for the Jewish people, Moses took a left and not a right, so he missed all of the oil. But what he did get was this land bridge between three different continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. So anyone in the who's who of great superpowers who ever had to expand their empire had to come through Israel. And that's what you see in Israel. You see this crazy amount of ruins of ancient civilizations. Now, there was a very famous Mark Twain observation. He wrote an article called Concerning the Jews, when he wrote that after visiting all these great ruins of empires, if any of you are familiar with the Shelley poem Ozymandias, so he visited these great empires, the Roman Empire ruins and the Colosseum. He visited the pyramids of Egypt. He visited the Acropolis of Greece. And everywhere he saw in the shadow of these once great empires were Jewish communities still existing. And he wrote, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans have risen and filled the planet with sound and splendor, but vanished into the dust of history. And the Jew has seen them all and beat them all and is still here today, offering no sign of weakness. What is the secret of his immortality? In other words, his question was, what did the Jews do right that everybody else did wrong? Again, if you would have gone to these empires at their peak and said, you will not be existing in another 2 millennia, but the Jews will, they would have laughed. But that's what happened. And tonight's presentation is just that. We're going to look at two different aspects of where I live. One is the ancient history, and one is the modern application today. Now, normally when you hear the word Modi'in, your natural association is of a famous Jewish holiday in competition with Christmas, and that is, of course, Hanukkah, because as everyone learns in Hebrew school, the Modi'in story, the Hanukkah story, started in a little village called Modi'in with Mattathias, in Hebrew Mattisyahu, and his sons, the most famous, of course, being Judah the Maccabee, Yehuda and his brothers, Shimon, Elazar, Eliezer, Yonatan, Yochanan, and the boss Maccabees, the brothers Maccabees, started the famous revolt against the Seleucid Greeks. But it goes back a lot further. And the thing about Israel is everywhere you go, everywhere you walk, everywhere you dig, you are going to find history. But in this case, it's not just his story or her story. It is our story as a Jewish people, as our story as monotheists. It's all deeply, deeply embedded, not just in the DNA of the land, but in the physical remains. Now, archaeology, for those of you who want a bit of a Greek lesson, comes from two words, archeo, logos, ancient knowledge. And this physical remains gives us a tangible connection to our past as Jews, and also there are many remains from Christian period as well. And we're going to explore both of these tonight as well when we look around Modi'in. Now, Modi'in's quite a recent city. I actually remember when I was doing my tour guide course back in the late 90s, we went to this hill, we saw some earth moving equipment, a few bulldozers, a few lorries down in the valley. And our instructor said, by the way, they're building a new city now in Israel. It's going to be called Modi'in. And it's more or less in the geographical location where ancient Modi'in was. And it's going to be one of the largest newly constructed cities in Israel. And this is back in the 1990s. And it was literally just some earth moving equipment. And we thought, how can this be a city? I now live in that city. Over 2 decades later, there are 300,000 people living in this city. And it was the first actual planned city in Israel. The architect who built it is a very famous architect, a Canadian-Israeli architect called Moshe Safdie, who also designed many other things such as the Singapore Harbor, Singapore Airport, Ben Gurion Airport, Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem. But this is the first city he designed. And you'll see in the video when you're driving around, there's a few things you don't see, which are wires above the ground, because everything's subterranean. What you do see is many green spaces, and the whole city was thought from scratch. Unlike many old cities, it's kind of just developed with a town planning, a very higgledy-piggledy. This city was thought out in advance and built in the most beautiful way. But of course, what happens in Israel when you start digging for foundations for building? Yes, you can all hear, I can hear you all, and you're all thinking the same thing. What happens when you start digging is you start finding stuff. Welcome to Israel and have a nice day. Because every civilization that was there has left remains. Usually what happens is a city will be destroyed, will be flattened, built on, built on, built on, built on. And sometimes you can have this artificial mound sticking up called the tell. Some can have as much as 18, 20 different cities, one on top of the other. So even a modern city like Modi'in, when they started digging, they found stuff. Now, some of the stuff they found, we're going to see in our first video, and this is before we even get into the city. Modi'in, again, if you look at the map, is right next to what's known as the Green Line, which is basically where Israel was until 1967, when the what's known as Judean Samaria or the West Bank, or more accurately, the disputed territories, was illegally occupied by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and only 2 countries recognized that annexation, and that was Pakistan and Great Britain, believe it or not. Not one Arab country recognized it. But that's a famous Green Line. That was where the armistice lines were from 1949 all the way through to 1967. So Israel decided to build a security fence along the Green Line just at the entrance of Modi'in. And when they started digging down to build the fence, they started finding stuff. What stuff they found, we're about to see in our first video, where my good friend who you're familiar with, Shmuel, with the South African accent, and myself are going to go out to the wilds of the suburbs of Modi'in, literally 5 minutes from our house, to see what kind of stuff was uncovered when all the builders wanted to do was just to build a security fence. Let's have a look. Dima, video number 1.
Dating back 2,000 years, would you believe it? Let's go. I hope you enjoyed the ride. That was 20 minutes outside the city, and look where we've arrived, to these beautiful rolling hills, ancient rocks coming out of the ground. There's a great story to tell here. A site so hidden, a site so unknown, that we need an expert to help us understand. And look at this timing, perfect timing. Dr. Tuvia Book making his way. Shalom Aleichem.
How's it? Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. What brings you here?
Funny you should say that it was time to explore where we come from.
I thought you were just roaming around. Oh well, amongst these Roman ruins, you can tell those jokes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what we can see. And there you have it, Dr. Tuvia book praying to Ra, the god of the sun. Okay, we'll do a quick jog to the nearby site. Check it out.
A 1,500-year-old mosaic floor.
Have a look at that.
I'm very cross with you.
A stylized cross.
Looking towards the east over here, semicircular apse, right over there in the middle. This is a classic Byzantine period church, or Byzantine as they say in the colonies. And Byzantine churches all face the east. They all had a double column main hall. Here's one set of column bases and another one over there. They usually
Is that called a basilica?
main basilica, main hall, correct? And usually separating the basilica from the apse where the service took place was a screen, was an altar screen. And you can see over here in the stone, indentations carved into the stone over here. This is where the marble altar screen would have been slotted in. And usually there was a reliquaries or bones of a saint buried somewhere in the apse as well. So we have a classical Byzantine church. And let's not forget, just to put it in historical context, that when the Roman fort was built, the Roman Empire in the 2nd century was a pagan empire. In the year 315, Constantine the Great, with the Edict of Milan, converted the Eastern Roman Empire to Christianity. And that became the state religion. So this church is from after the 4th century, and sometime between the 4th century and the 7th century with the Muslim conquest in 637. So we jumped from the Roman period to the Byzantine period in just a few meters.
Unbelievable.
And talking about mosaics, a very famous mosaic was found in another Byzantine church from the 6th century in Jordan, a place called
Madba.
Madva. Genius. And this had an entire depiction of the Holy Land in it. And in that map, underneath Jerusalem, more or less where we're standing, there was a town called Annaba. And the valley that runs to the west in Modin is to this day still called Annaba. Basically, we're standing in a Byzantine church, which is depicted in another Byzantine church from the 6th century, the Common Era. This is probably the only time in the field of archaeology where archaeologists have been aided by 1,500 mosaic map to identify sites.
Next to home.
One more thing about the mosaics. The mosaics also have patterns in them of crosses, which we'll examine here. You can see stylized crosses made by the Christian architect 1,500 years ago. And this also helps us date the church, because in the 5th century there was a law that you're no longer allowed to put crucifixes on church floors because it was considered to be sacrilegious as people walked on them. So these crosses help us date the church sometime at the beginning of the Byzantine period, around the 4th century of the Common Era.
Look at the bases of these pillars. Is this the other side of the basilica?
There's indeed double rows of basilica with a water system under the ground for storage. Another huge water system. This was outside the church, and it's actually carved into the bedrock, which is not where the Flintstones lived.
Let's check it out though.
It's got stairs going in, it's got an arch.
In we go. It's a nice place for snakes, scorpions, and the occasional hyena or fox. Where are you? I need light.
So we've just come in a beautifully carved stone doorway, and we're walking around here, and we see holes for oil lamps carved into the rock itself. 1,500-year-old soot still on the wall. You see a niche in the wall, maybe for some type of a statue. And over here, another niche, which in Hebrew is called a kuch. Second Temple period times and afterwards, including the Byzantine era, were actually used for burial. Back then, there was a secondary burial as well. Initially, they would put bodies in tombs, just like in the time of the story of Jesus, where they would put his body in a tomb, because using the Second Temple period, seal the entrance for a year, and this door over here could easily be sealed by a big stone block. And then they would come back a year later, gather up the bones and bury them again in secondary burial and put them in something called a sarcophagus, which only had to be the size of your femur, which is your biggest bone over here. And then the little coffin was then put into a little niche or kuch. And this is the niche right here behind us, where probably there was an important dignitary or Byzantine monks or priests were buried.
In his very own ossuary.
Right outside the church.
Right. We're going to head out. We're going to miss the sunset.
I see the light. Okay.
Okay, we're finding ourselves now at the eastern extremity of the site, right next to the security fence, which had to be moved because of all the finds in this area. But what's so fascinating about what we've just seen in the short space of time, we had Roman infrastructure, we had Byzantine infrastructure, and here we have an earlier form of human activity, and this was the place of the ritual bath, the mikveh, a place to get spiritually cleansed. Makes perfect sense here. We're on the historical pilgrimage route leading from Jaffa to Jerusalem, and in this region many ritual baths were found and uncovered. Just about 26 Roman miles from the temple, you could get ritually cleansed and basically prevent yourself from the big rush in Jerusalem. By the time you get there, you are prepared and ready to serve in the temple.
Well, this is the third part of our puzzle. The first part, Roman force. They couldn't build the fence there. So they moved the fence slightly towards east, and they found the Byzantine church. And they said, okay, well, we're going to build on the other side of the Byzantine church. And boom, they found another site of antiquity right behind us, the Second Temple period mikveh. So it's just incredible, Israel, that where literally wherever you dig, you find history beneath your footsteps. The remains of every great empire in history you'll find in this land, from the Greeks to the Persians, to the Byzantines, to the Romans, to the Crusaders. And it's just amazing that Israel itself is a incredible site, a land bridge between three continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. And all these great empires used Israel as a stomping ground. In this teeny little area where we're standing now, you can see that, a microcosm of that phenomena.
A place to come to and a place to use all your senses. And I wish you were here with us. At the moment, I'm smelling this incredible fig tree. I'm feeling the dust and the stones of the Holy Land. We're at a site that deals with polytheists, with Christians, with Jews, with monotheists. And behind me, we're hearing the muezzin call to prayer from the town of Beit Likya. So, you know, it's an explosion of feelings. And it doesn't matter where you are in this country. Every corner has a story to tell, and every piece of territory has something to find. So never a dull moment, but we are so looking forward to having you here. We love virtually taking you around, and we'll continue to do so, but it's best to come here, see.
Ima,
taste,
מתי שאתה יכול להפסיק את זה, זה
smell.
בסדר. One cannot replace an experience. Okay, folks, so that was just the periphery of Modi'in. Did you understand what was going on there? They want to build a fence. Boom, they find a Byzantine church. They move the fence a little bit. Boom, they find a Second Temple period mikveh, ritual bath in the bedrock. They want to move the fence a bit more. Boom, they find a Roman temple. And this is places no one's even heard of in Israel. Literally on the entrance to Modin itself, 2,000 years of history, polytheism, monotheism, Judaism, Christianity. But again, you can't replace an experience itself. You can't replace actually being in a city. You can't replace walking around and seeing it and feeling it and touching it. This is part of experiential education. Now, of course, Modin is most famous for its relationship to the Hanukkah story. So very briefly, before we go into our next little journey, which will be from the modern city of Modi'in towards its other exit, you have a amazing connection between a modern place and an ancient place. So when they were building in Modin, as they do, they started finding things. And one of the new neighborhoods, the exit of the city, they were digging in a field to lay foundations for modern apartment buildings, modern blocks of flats, and they found beautifully dressed stones. And then when they dug a bit closer, they found underneath these stones a ritual bath, a mikveh, and they saw that the entrance was facing towards Jerusalem. And normally when we think of synagogues, places of gathering, or Bet Knesset, again, Mark Twain's question is, what kept the Jewish people Jewish? He didn't understand. He finished his question with a rhetorical question mark. What is the secret of immortality? What did the Jews do right that everyone did wrong? And the answer is three things, three very beautiful, simple things. This is the ingredients of survival. One, of course, is we kept our faith in our traditions wherever we lived. The Torah, the Pentateuch was portable and went where there's in the good times and the bad times. The other thing is we never forgot that our attachments to the land of Israel itself. And wherever we lived, every synagogue faced towards the land of Israel. Every synagogue in the land of Israel faced towards J-Town, the big J, Jerusalem. And within Jerusalem itself, every synagogue faced towards the Temple Mount itself. So you have these three circles connecting Jews from all over the world to the hub of spirituality of the Jewish people. And this building that was found was actually identified as not just a synagogue, but believe it or not, we're about to see it soon in our next video, the oldest synagogue on the planet Earth. Because normally the association with the synagogue is a building that was built after the temple was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE, and that was called the Bet HaMikdash, or the holy place. And it very much relates to what I'm going to talk to now about the holy day that's coming up in a few days, Yom Kippur. A lot of the Yom Kippur service deals with what went on in the Holy Temple itself. We're talking about all the rituals, the spirituality, the holiness, where Jews from all over the world came at least on the three high holy days of Passover, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuot on a pilgrimage up to the holy city of Jerusalem, to the temple itself. And Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the holiest people in the holiest year, a unique thing happened on Yom Kippur, and that was the high priest himself went into the Holy of Holies only once the entire year, and that was on Yom Kippur. So the temple itself was the central building in Judaism, and that is why there's so much focus on it in the actual Yom Kippur liturgy as well. However, how did Jews survive once that temple was destroyed, once Jewish independence was lost? Once the Jewish people were scattered all over the world, what was the secret? So one of them, of course, was tradition. We have tradition everywhere we go. The second was a sense of community. Wherever the Jews were, on the highest place of every hill, according to the Talmud, they built a synagogue. Now, a synagogue in Hebrew is not a bet tefillah, a place, a house of prayer. It's a Bet Knesset, which means a house of gathering, very familiar to the function of a JCC, a Jewish Community Center, where Jews would come and they would laugh and they would pray as well. They would study, they would hang out, they would socialize. It's a very big, important part of Judaism when they come to shul, as we all know, not just to pray, but the schmoozing and the socializing and meeting other Jewish people, especially when you're part of a minority in a majority non-Jewish culture. It's nice to have a place where you can chill and hang out. And that was really the function of the synagogue. It kept the Jewish. It kept them their sense of community, where they could get together, where they could meet people, both for social reasons and maybe even for the big M, for marital reasons, where they could study about their traditions. As we know in Yiddish, a synagogue is called a shul, which also doesn't mean house of prayer. It means a school, because also people studied there as well. So it had many, many different functions. And that was basically the synagogue. And we all assumed that after that temple was destroyed, the rabbi said, well, we've lost our main temple, so we're going to build small temples all over the Jewish world. And in fact, the Hebrew word is Migdash Ma'at, or a small temple. And yet this particular synagogue uncovered in Modi'in, which we're just about to bike to, or I went there really with my friend Sam, you're going to virtually bike there, literally within the modern city boundaries, was built in the 2nd century BCE. So it predates any of the earlier synagogues, such as the ones on Masada, for example, by about 200 years. So we learn from this that even whilst that second temple was still standing in Jerusalem, some of the provincial or outlying communities built their own little synagogues as well. And it's very emotional to me personally as well, because when my daughter had her bar mitzvah, we did it in that synagogue. Just quite incredible to be able to take your 12-year-old daughter to actually have a service in a synagogue where Jews had prayed and sat and laughed 2,200 years earlier, just to feel that we're all links in the chain of Jewish continuity. It's a very emotional moment to know that, as opposed to just seeing another old ruin. Sometimes you go around and see all these ancient ruins, oh, same stones, different place. To know that we were using that building for the very same function it was built for more than 2 millennia ago. It gives you a very strong sense of continuity, of being a link in that chain of Jewish continuity. And that synagogue from the town of Modi'in, from the Hanukkah story, is also used every Hanukkah, where all the modern Jews who live in the town congregate in that synagogue and make it come alive with the sound of music and singing and dancing and light. It's a very beautiful building, and that's what we're going to explore. Again, only in Israel do you build a modern suburb and find a 2,200-year-old synagogue just under the ground, almost as it was waiting to be uncovered when the Jews returned back to their land. It had been laying hidden for those 2 millennia. So let's go and see what it looks like. In order to get there, we're going to hop on our bikes and bike away. Dima.
Morning, Shmuel, the running tour guide. Today going to be a biking guide.
לא שומעים. תחזור בהתחלה, לא שומעים דימה.
On the way, we're in the modern city of Modi'in. We're going to shed some light on the story of Hanukkah. We're heading to some fascinating places. Any ideas where we're going today?
We're in Modi'in, so I think we should go to Modi'in.
Makes sense.
All right.
Let's do it.
Yalla.
Alrighty, we're en route. We're crossing the railway line. Look behind us, a beautiful park called Anabe. Stay tuned for the view. Ain't this stunning? Love my home. This is a central park. Just a 5-minute bike ride, and here we are. We're on the southern outskirts of Modi'in, rooted in the times of the Maccabees. That's what we're dealing with today, the times of the Hashmonaim.
The small site where we're standing right now over here is dated from pottery shards to more or less the time of the Hasmonean dynasty. That is the 1st century before the Common Era.
And if we think of Matityahu and we think of his sons Yochanan, Yonatan, Yehuda, Elazar, Shimon, very probable they would have come to a site like this, be it a house of gathering, be it a place where the communities met, be it a place that people would pray.
It's not just about the stones, it's about the people. It says very clearly in the Torah, in the Bible, Tivnuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Build me a temple, a holy place, and I will dwell in them. It's a people that make it holy. And these stones over here look like a pile of stones. But this Shabbat Chanukah, they're going to come alive when modern day Jews, the descendants of those very Maccabees that lived here 2 millennia ago, are going to come and do the Friday night Shabbat Chanukah service in this very spot where Jews prayed and laughed and sang and studied 2 millennia ago.
That's it. Tomorrow, see you here.
It doesn't get much more symbolic than this. What you can see over here is a menorah, but not just any old menorah, a very special menorah sitting on the stones of this synagogue from the time of the Hanukkah story itself, of the Maccabees. This menorah, as you can see, is made out of cartridge cases, which I collected during my IDF service. And it so happened we were in the middle of the desert, it was Hanukkah, no one had a menorah because we were doing maneuvers, And basically, someone had brought the candles, but there was no menorah. So I went around after a live fire exercise, collected the cartridge shells, and made a menorah out of it. And what the symbolism there, the big prayer we say on Hanukkah is called Al HaNisim, about the miracles. And one of the lines is Bayamim Ahem Bazman Hazeh, in those days and in these days. In those days, Jews rose up to defend Judaism and the Jewish homeland. And in these days, we have the IDF, the modern Maccabees, who defend our homeland and our values and keep Zionism and Judaism alive for Jews in the Jewish homeland. This menorah, even though it's an ancient symbol, is made up of the symbols of the modern Maccabees. And right next to it, in front of it, we have an oil lamp from the time of the Hanukkah story as well. It's in lamps like this. This is a Hellenistic oil lamp from 2,100 years ago with the original soot over here. And 2,000 years ago, this is the way lamps would have looked. They would have been lit by olive oil in the temple and in everyone's houses. Finally, one of the big symbols of Hanukkah is Hanukkah Geld, which means money in Yiddish. What I have over here is the actual Hanukkah Geld. These two small coins over here were minted by none other than Alexander Yaneos. Now his Hebrew name was Yochanan, and on one side of this coin here, this is a 2,100-year-old coin minted between the years 103 and 76 BCE. And you can see over here there's an anchor, a picture of an anchor, because they also had a trading kingdom. And some letters here, it looks like Greek to you and Greek to me, because it is Greek. And what it says over here is Basilius Alexander, King Alexander. And on the other side, there's a picture of a star, a wheel of a star. And it has on it in Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew script, Melech Yonatan, King Jonathan. That was his Hebrew name. And you can see the ancient Hebrew mem over there. Now this coin caused a huge amount of controversy because he called himself king. And according to the religious Jews, only God's prophet could anoint a king. And until Alexander Yaneos, no one had called themselves king. It caused so much trouble, he had to mint another coin. And the second coin he minted has on it two cornucopia, horns of plenty over here. On the other side, in ancient Hebrew, there's an inscription that says Yochanan, his Hebrew name, Chaver Motzet Yodim, a friend of the Jewish council. And the second coin does not mention anything to do with being a king. So it's pretty amazing how coins have a historical value, and also you can feel an energy to know that the great grandson of Matityahu, of Mattathias, from Modin, where we're sitting right now, minted these coins. So this is the real Hanukkah Geld. This guy's great grandfather actually revolted against the Seleucid Greeks.
That is so cool. Thank you so much for the Hanukkah Geld.
To coin a phrase.
Anyway, folks, I'm going to be posting a link where you can actually purchase these Second Temple coins and also read about some symbolic modern coins that are being minted with historical events that are taking place in our times. Even me, working, living, feeding Israel, to touch a coin like this is something you don't do every day, and especially in a historical site where these coins were traded. Wow. Yeah. Nes Gadol Haya Po. Literally, yeah. See you tomorrow night at the shul. Okay, right next to the Beit Knesset, the House of Gathering, we have a ritual bath from the period of the Second Temple. Beautifully hewn stones here underneath the shul, underneath the Beit Knesset. You can see hydraulic plaster and even some water from the last rains out on the bottom. Not sure if you can see. Beautiful, fresh, and it's time to head to the bathhouse. Let's go. Crossed over the Ayalon Valley and we've entered the Ayalon forests. And here we have a fantastic example of an oil press, the Rolling Stones.
Original Rolling Stones in their first performance in Israel 2,000 years ago. And this thing over here is a black olive. All around me are olive trees, probably descendants of those very same olive trees that were here 2,000 years ago. It was a major source of income. Olives were very useful for many things. for oil lamps, for soap, for cooking, for kindling. There was no end to the use of olives. And guess what? The greatest superpower of the day, Egypt, did not have indigenous olive trees. So Judea used to import a lot of its olive oil to Egypt and all throughout the Roman Empire, in fact. So there was a massive industry of olive pressing, which led to the wealth of Judea. And it was very simple, the process. They would get little olives, they would put them underneath these stones over here, and then they would be tied to an animal who would just literally walk around, and the stone would crush. And this is just the first stage. Once the olives were crushed, they would then take the crushed olives and put them in baskets and go for second pressing as well.
So wouldn't leave you feeling depressed?
I'll be glad you said that.
Okay, folks, we're going a little bit off the beaten track here into the forest. We have a super spot that I bet you very few know about. There it is in the distance, and we're going to connect it to the story of Hanukkah, a Roman bathhouse, the extension of the culture of Hellenism. You can find right here. Just look at that. A hidden gem right outside the city of Modi'in, taking us back to the Roman times. Nice. Mosaic floor.
Bit of an arch. Pools.
Aren't you glad we found this? You've got a beautiful octagonal shaped pool. Check out the water system here. Little viaduct. Bringing water right around the building. Master architecture. View from the roof. Here we are, folks, in one of the most well-preserved Roman bathhouses in the Promised Land, in the Holy Land. Hold on a second. We're dealing with Hanukkah. What's this got to do with the Maccabees? These were the Romans.
Okay, so what Hanukkah really was a culture camp, was a culture war between the Judaic values and Hellenistic values. And Rome was the up and rising power at the time of the Maccabees. In fact, Judah the Maccabee made a treaty with Rome against the Seleucids. So the Romans were definitely around at the time. And the Romans also adopted Hellenistic practices, that is, worship of the external beauty, appearances count, don't look at the beauty within, only the beauty without. And the epitome of this was the Roman bathhouse. The Roman bathhouse is where people went, just like in Hellenistic times, all the athletic competitions were in your birthday suit, because it was the worship of the external human body. So in order to look good and to preen yourself, you went down to the local bathhouse. That was a Hellenistic hangout. And each Roman bathhouse was built in the same way. And here it's very clear to see there was three main rooms. The room we're standing in right now was actually called a tepidarium, the Latin word tepid, warm. And underneath the floor, you can see these original Roman bricks where heated hot air would flow under the floor just to warm this room up, not to make it super hot, but just to keep it warm. Once you were pleasantly warm, you proceed into the next room to get yourself in the Roman bath mood. And here there's no underground heating. This was just cold water coming from the local springs. This was the plunge pool where you were dunking. This was just freezing cold water. And once you had that experience of freezing cold water, you would then go to the biggest chamber of the whole bathhouse, what was known as the caldarium. You went from the tepidarium to the frigarium to the caldarium. So over here behind, you can see part of the Roman brickwork over here. Here there's a Roman arch, and this arch of brickwork would support the floor level, which is up to the threshold behind you over there, Shmuel, you'd have slaves from outside the building lighting up fire, and that would heat the floor, and then there would be pipes also going up as well, the wall itself. It would be a superheated room where you would basically what we call today the schwitz, or the hot room. And there you would lie on the side of this hot water, and your slaves would come and they would scrape your sweat off, and you would massage you with oil. And basically it was a very hedonistic, Hellenistic experience.
Okay, folks, hope you enjoyed that run around Modi'in and seeing some of the sights, experiencing the period of the Hashmonaim. We're going to leave you here from the home of Hellenism. We're heading home, ready to celebrate a wonderful festival of light. Light is what we need. Boy, oh boy, if there ever was a period of history that we've got to spread the light, we're happy to do it. You can see Modi'in just is that place that gives a sense of light, a sense of hope. You saw the beautiful modern Modi'in. So with that, Dr. Tovia Book, Shmuel Chantal, we're wishing you a Chag Chanukah Sameach.
Chag Urim Sameach.
Amen.
אתה יכול להפסיק, דימה. Okay, folks, so as you know, that second one was recorded just before Hanukkah, and it really makes it come alive. I have to tell you, remember you saw the menorah in the synagogue that was made out of cartridge cases. So again, sometimes when you say prayers, especially if you're what's known as FFB, which means from birth, and you just say the prayers, or most Jews around the world who don't really understand the Hebrew that they're mumbling in the prayer book, it's difficult to relate to it. It's just like mumble, 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 mumble. It's from right to left. And it's very different when you actually experience what those words mean. So for example, in the Hanukkah prayer, there's a prayer called Ananesim, where we thank God for the miracles. And one of the miracles that's not mentioned, of course, is the oil miracle. It's not mentioned in the prayer itself, but rather the few against the many, the holy against the unclean, etc., etc. And it's something that happened, again, 2,100 years ago. And that's when the story of Hanukkah itself happened. It was men in skirts with some spears and swords and shields. How do we relate to it? The three-letter answer how we relate to it is IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. After the Six-Day War, when Israel's territorial gains was 3 times by a teeny little army, outnumbered, outgunned, out-equipped by all the surrounding armies, people brought, even the most secular, brought analogies of Hanukkah. Once again, the few against the many. So when I was in the IDF, we were doing reserve duty in the Negev desert, and as per usual in the army, nothing's particularly organized at times, and our reserve duty ended up being extended by a few days into Hanukkah. And nobody had thought about, well, maybe it's going to go wrong, maybe we should bring a menorah with. So no one had actually bought the menorah. Some bloke, don't ask me why, had actually bought a box of Hanukkah candles with. So we had the candles, nowhere to light it. So one thing I learned as the idea of combat medic is if you don't have the correct material, you have to improvise. If you run out of bandage, doesn't mean the guy should bleed to death. You rip your shirt off, you make another bandage. So there was no menorah. So what did I do? The answer, you've seen the end, is what you saw in the synagogue. We had a live fire exercise. I went around gathering up the cartridges we've been shooting in our big Browning machine guns, and the candle went right inside because the diameter was too big. So I went around and collected some more cartridges, which was smaller diameter, and the candle fit nicely inside. Then I clipped together the 8 and put a high one for the shamas. So in essence, a whole bunch of Jews from different backgrounds, some religious, some secular, some like me, new immigrants, some of them veteran Israelis, some rich, some poor, from all sorts of ethnic different backgrounds, were gathered around in the middle of the desert under thousands of stars, lighting our menorah made out of bullet cartridges, the modern Maccabees commemorating the ancient Maccabees, saying Bayamim Ahem Bazman Hazeh, in those days and in these days. And it was a very, very powerful moment where we connected our ancient traditions to our modern traditions as well. And anyone who visits Israel this Hanukkah, this coming year, which hopefully, and it really seems to be the case, that Israel is finally opening up to tourists. So we're expecting December to be a bumper tourist season. We'll notice that everybody lights menorahs in Israel. It's not just the religious Jews, also the secular Jews. You can go and find them lit in Mea Shearim, and you can go and find them lit in Tel Aviv. everyone lights a menorah. Some people might light them for religious reasons, in other words, for the miracle of Hanukkah, that is as recorded in the Talmud, even though there's no historical source for that, of the oil lasting for 8 days. And some people would light it for nationalistic reasons. Look, it's a few against the many, just like today, where light has prevailed against darkness. And some people for a mixture of both, for religious and nationalistic reasons. The point is, there's ancient modern holidays celebrated all throughout the land. And it's an incredible thing just to be in a town called Modi'in, where I live right now, and to be able to step into a synagogue and know that Jews were sitting there over 2 millennia ago with the same language, the same traditions, the same connection to the land, that sense of community. And it just goes to show that we are all links in this chain going far back. And it's a very emotional experience. Just to conclude, I grew up in the UK and in South Africa. And one thing we always knew was how many shopping days there were till Christmas. You can't help it because it just surrounds you when you grow up as a minority in a majority Christian culture. So I remember once we were doing maneuvers in the IDF, we were in the Negev desert, very cut off. And I looked at my watch and it said the 27th of December. I'm like, whoa, it was Christmas 2 days ago and I didn't even know it. And that's what it's like sometimes when you live in a majority Jewish culture, the only country in the world, the land of Israel, where even if you're secular, you know when the holidays are, because everyone lights menorahs. You go to the supermarket on Passover, everything's kosher for Pesach. Everyone speaks Hebrew and understands the words of the prayers if they want to say them, because Hebrew is the national language. And that's what it means to live. And we live in very blessed times where we can be in charge of our own destiny, for better or for worse. And of course, Israel, like any other democracy, is wrestling and struggling with a few issues of its own. But most importantly, where the Jewish holidays and Jewish traditions are part of the majority culture. And that's what people say when they come to Israel, even for the first time, they feel like they've come home. And really, that's what it's about. And hopefully this winter will be a reopening, a relightening, and that 4-hour flight, which can take you back either to 3,000 years of history to the modern Israel, both of them exist side by side. So in this beautiful modern city of Modin, you also have our ancient roots as well. And our rabbis teach us, Da me'ayin bata v'la'an ata holech. Know where you come from in order to know where you're going to. So it's an amazing thing to be and living in modern Israel, like a school child, learning about Hanukkah, then on a school trip, just traveling for 5 minutes in a bus and actually going to see where the Jews lived, where they prayed, where they laughed, where they sang. And thank God that light is still with us today. It's not a burden to be a Jew, but it's an honor and a privilege to be a Jew. And you really feel that when you're in Israel and you come and see the light and the happiness, and the dancing. It's not all about death, suffering, and food, but about beauty and life. And I'd like to thank you for being with me just before we go to Yom Kippur, and wish everyone a Shana Tova, a happy and healthy new year and a sweet new year. And I noticed that there are no questions, so I don't have to answer any questions because there aren't any. Let's see, I'm just looking at your notes over here. You've got about a few seconds if you want to type a quick question in the comment section. Blah, 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 blah.
Anything is the historic significance of Modi'in Elite?
Modi'in Elite is a modern ultra-Orthodox town on the other side of the Green Line to Israel, to Modi'in. And the town itself was built obviously quite recently, but in the middle of it, interestingly enough, is also another ancient synagogue as well from the 3rd century of the Common Era. That's the middle of the modern Modi'in Elite, which is an ultra-Orthodox suburb, I would say, of Modi'in, but on the other side of the Green Line. What are other things we have? Oh yeah, another comment about the population of modern Modi'in. So anticipated is going to be 300,000. Today, it's more or less around 100,000 Jews living there. And they're busy building a second stage building, very busily building. As you all know, Israel's national bird is the crane. And there are hundreds of cranes in Modi'in, construction cranes. And they're anticipating when the second stage is finished, there'll be about 250,000 people living in Modi'in. Okay, do you have any other questions? Okay, no, thank you for all your thank yous, much appreciated. It's nice to see all the familiar faces again. And most importantly, I'm looking forward to welcome you guys for real in Israel very, very soon. So have a Shana Tova, a happy and healthy new year, full of light and full of health.
Thank you very much, Tuvia. Thank you very much for the fascinating lecture. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. On behalf of myself, World Zionist Organization, UK, and Zionist Federation, I would like to wish you and your family Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova, and Tzom Kal. And I just want to remind you, we actually finished the series of the Off the Beaten Track, but we will meet Tuvia books soon, on the 5th of October, with another amazing lecture about Ben Gurion from our Inspirational Zionist series. Begin, my apologies, Menachem Begin. Yes, please stay tuned. We will send you information about it. Thank you very much. Hope you will join us. And מודיעים בשמחה. Thank you. תודה. Good night.
בבקשה.
גמר חתימה טובה.